The stagecoach lurched to a halt in a cloud of alkali dust that coated everything: teeth, tongue, the back of Joanna Keats's throat. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips and squinted through the haze at what passed for civilization in this corner of the Arizona Territory. Dust Haven. Even the name sounded like a cough. "End of the line, ma'am." The driver called down, his voice gravelly from years of breathing the same grit. "Watch your step." Jo gathered her skirts in one hand and her carpetbag in the other, ignoring his offered assistance as she descended. The heavy photography equipment case would require help, though she'd learned to choose her battles with male pride. The town sprawled before her like a collection of wooden boxes thrown by a petulant child, false-fronted buildings leaning against each other for support, their pine boards already weathered to the color of old bones. A windmill creaked nearby, its metal blades catching what little breeze stirred the September heat. Ravens perched on the telegraph wires, watching her arrival with the disinterest of permanent residents observing another transient. "Careful with that case," Jo instructed as two men unloaded her equipment. "It contains delicate glass plates." One of them, a boy really, with peach fuzz masquerading as whiskers, grinned at her. "You a photographer, Miss?" "Among other things." She didn't elaborate. Let them wonder. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Jo could feel sweat gathering beneath her corset despite the lightweight cotton of her traveling dress. She'd need to find lodging soon. And water. Always water first in these desert towns. She'd learned that lesson in Kansas. The public well stood in what generously might be called the town square, a patch of hard-packed earth surrounded by the essential business's general store, saloon, livery stable, and what appeared to be a combination barbershop and undertaker. Practical folks, these Westerners. Jo made her way toward the well, her button boots clicking on the wooden sidewalk where it existed, crunching on gravel where it didn't. That's when she saw him. He stood with his back to her, shoulders broad beneath a worn chambray shirt, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked by scars. His hands worked steadily on the windmill's gear mechanism, making adjustments with the unconscious competence of long practice. There was something in his stance, a readiness, a coiled tension that spoke of a man accustomed to watching his back. Jo found herself reaching for her camera case before she'd made a conscious decision. The light was perfect, slanting across his form and throwing dramatic shadows. She worked quickly, coating a glass plate with collodion, sliding it into the camera, adjusting the bellows. The process was second nature after years of practice. Through the ground glass, she composed the shot. The man, the windmill, the endless sky. She squeezed the bulb. I didn't give permission for that. She hadn't heard him approach. One moment he'd been 20 feet away at the windmill. Now he stood close enough that she could smell leather and lamp oil and something indefinably masculine. His eyes were the color of winter sage, and they missed nothing as they traveled from her camera to her face. "I don't recall asking for it," Jo replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Public square. Public subject." Something flickered across his features, amusement, perhaps, or respect. "Archer Hale," he said, not offering his hand. His eyes had already catalogued her lack of wedding ring, the quality of her dress, the professional grade of her equipment. "You're the photographer from St. Louis. Heard you were coming." "News travels fast." "Only kind that does out here." He gestured toward the windmill. "You always photograph men without their knowledge." "Only when they're particularly picturesque." The words were out before she could stop them, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. But before he could respond, a commotion erupted near the well. 3 men on horseback had arrived, dust devils swirling around their mounts' hooves. Jo recognized the type immediately, hired guns, their purpose written in the low-slung holsters and the casual cruelty of their expressions. "Afternoon. Hail," the lead rider said, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Mr. Stroud sends his regards." Says it's time to reconsider his offer about the water rights. Archer's posture shifted subtly, weight redistributing to the balls of his feet. Tell Caleb Stroud the co-op's answer hasn't changed. The water belongs to everyone who works this land. See, that's where you're wrong. The gunman dismounted, spurs jangling. Water belongs to whoever's strong enough to take it. Mister, Stroud's fixing to prove that real soon. The other two riders had positioned themselves strategically, hands resting on pistol grips. Jo found herself calculating angles and distances, old instincts from covering the border troubles kicking in. She slowly reached into her bag, fingers finding the small derringer she kept there. "Jake," Archer's voice carried a warning. "You really want to do this here now?" Jake's grin was all teeth and no warmth. "Good a time as any. Boys are going to disconnect that pipe you folks ran from the spring. Mister, Stroud's orders." The square had gone quiet. Shopkeepers stood in doorways. Women gathered children closer, everyone waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Archer moved then, but not toward his gun. Instead, he walked calmly to the windmill and turned a large valve wheel. The steady trickle of water from the public fountain slowed, then stopped entirely. "What are you—" Jake started. 5 minutes, Archer said conversationally. "That's how long before folks start feeling thirsty. 10 minutes, they start getting worried. 15, and that worry turns to panic." He leaned against the windmill frame. "Casual as you please. See, you can threaten all you want, but I control the valve, and the valve controls the water. And water, well," he shrugged, "water controls everything else." The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Jo watched Jake's face cycle through confusion, anger, and finally, a dawning comprehension. Already, people were looking at the dry fountain with alarm. "You can't." "Sure I can. Just did." Archer checked his pocket watch. 3 minutes now. Mrs. Chen needs water for her laundry business. Doc Morrison needs it for his patients. Every horse in that livery needs it. His smile held no humor. "You want to explain to Mr. Stroud how his tough talk led to half the town dying of thirst." Jake's hand twitched toward his gun, but one of his companions grabbed his arm. "Jake, he's right. Boss won't thank us if—" "Shut up!" But Jake was sweating now, and not just from the heat. The crowd had grown, pressing closer, and the mood had shifted from fearful to angry. 4 minutes. "Tell you what," Archer said. "You boys ride on back to Stroud. Tell him the co-op's answer stands. The water stays public. He wants to discuss it civilized-like. He knows where to find me." Jo held her breath, finger on the derringer's trigger. The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Then Jake spat in the dust and wheeled his horse around. "This ain't over, Hale!" Never thought it was. The 3 riders galloped off, and Archer turned the valve back on. Water gurgled, then flowed freely again. The collective sigh of relief was audible. Jo realized she'd captured the entire scene on her camera's plate, the standoff. The dry fountain, the crowd's faces. Without conscious thought, she'd documented a moment that would define Dust Haven's struggle. Archer appeared at her elbow. "That's a dangerous picture you just took." "Most true ones are." He studied her for a long moment. "You planning to develop it?" "Planning to do a lot of things." She met his gaze squarely. "Including my job." "Your job might get you killed." "So might yours, Mr. Hale." He almost smiled then. "Fair point. But I know this country. Miss Keats. You stand near the vein. You better know which way the blood flows." "Is that a warning?" "Call it friendly advice." He touched his hat brim. "Welcome to Dust Haven. Try not to die your first day." As he walked away, Jo noticed the way he moved, not quite a limp, but favoring his left side slightly. Another scar. Another story. This town was full of them, apparently. She looked down at her camera, at the plate that held the captured moment of crisis. Caleb Stroud had noticed her. All right. His men would report the woman with the camera, the Easterner who'd witnessed their humiliation. She'd painted a target on herself before she'd even unpacked. But as she watched Archer Hale disappear into the shade of the livery stable, Jo felt something she hadn't experienced since James died, a quickening of interest that had nothing to do with her work and everything to do with the way a man's hands could be gentle with machinery and firm with threats, all in the space of 5 minutes. She squared her shoulders and picked up her equipment. First order of business, find lodging. Second, establish her shop. Third, stay alive long enough to figure out why Archer Hale looked at water like a man who'd once watched someone die of thirst. The ravens cawed overhead, and dust devils danced in the street. Welcome to Dust Haven, indeed. The morning sun slanted through gaps in the wooden walls, painting stripes across the floor of what would become Jo's shop. Dinah Carter stood with hands on hips, surveying the space with a critical eye. Used to be Hendrix's saddlery, she said, her voice carrying the musical cadence of Georgia despite 15 years in the territories. Man couldn't stitch leather worth beans, but he kept the roof tight. That's something. Jo set down her carpet bag and walked the perimeter of the room, testing floorboards for weak spots. It'll do. I need space for the dark room in back, and the front window's good for portrait light. Dinah's knowing smile suggested she'd heard plenty of plans from newcomers before. Rent's $12 a month. Paid to Judge Morrison, first of each. Water's from the common well, unless you want to pay extra for private access. The common well is fine. That's what you say now. Dinah moved to the window, rubbing a clear spot in the dusty glass. Wait till you're hauling buckets in August heat with half the town watching and commenting on your bustle. Jo laughed, despite herself. I've hauled water before. I bet you have. Dinah turned from the window, her expression growing serious. Listen, honey, you seem like good people. So I'm going to give you some free advice. This town's sitting on a powder keg. And that scene yesterday with Archer Hale, that was just the match being waved around. I gathered as much. No, I don't think you did. Dinah settled onto a dusty crate, patting another for Jo to join her. See, water's always been life or death out here, but it used to be we all understood that, shared the hardship, shared the resource. Then Caleb Stroud struck silver up in the Mule Mountains, and everything changed. Jo pulled out her notebook, then paused. Do you mind if I... Right away, child. About time someone recorded the truth instead of the dime novel version. Dinah waited until Jo's pencil was ready. Stroud came here 5 years ago, another fortune hunter with big dreams. But unlike most, he had the luck or the devil's blessing to actually find what he was looking for. That silver mine made him rich. But rich wasn't enough. He wants an empire. And empires need water. Smart girl. The mine needs water for processing ore. His grand plans for stamping mills and smelters need even more. Problem is, there's only so much to go around. The spring that feeds the common well. It's been flowing steady since before the Apache knew this place. But it ain't infinite. The door creaked open. Interrupting them, a boy of maybe 12 peered in, all knobby knees and sunburned ears beneath a too large hat. Miss Dinah, my ma sent me to... Oh. His eyes widened at the sight of Jo and her equipment. You're the picture lady. I am. And you are. Tommy Pike, ma'am. He removed his hat, revealing a shock of straw-colored hair. I help with the cattle outside town. Heard you took a picture of Mr. Hale yesterday. Wish I'd seen it. Perhaps you'll see others, Jo said gently. Do you like photographs, Tommy? His face lit up. Yes, ma'am. Saw some once in a magazine somebody left at the Mercantile. Pictures of President Hayes and everything. Could barely believe eyes could be captured on paper like that. Would you like to learn how it's done? The boy's jaw dropped. You mean it you'd teach me? Tommy Pike, don't you go bothering Miss Keats. Dinah warned. She's got a business to set up. He's no bother. Jo studied the boy's eager face. Can you read, Tommy? His expression fell. No, ma'am. Never had much schooling. Been working cattle since I was 7. Well, photography requires reading chemical labels and instructions. Tell you what, you help me set up my shop, and I'll teach you letters along with camera work. Deal. Tommy's grin could have powered a locomotive. Yes, ma'am. When do I start? How about now? This equipment needs unpacking, and I need someone who knows where to find supplies in town. As Tommy eagerly attacked the crates, Dinah caught Joe's arm. That was kind. What you just did. Boys had a hard life. Father died in a mine cave-in. Mother takes in washing to keep them fed. But kindness can be dangerous here. Stroud doesn't like anyone building loyalties that don't lead back to him. I'll take my chances. I hope you do. We need more women with spine in this town. Dinah stood, smoothing her skirts. Speaking of which, Sheriff O'Rourke wants to meet you. Something about official documentation. Joe raised an eyebrow. Documentation. May's got this idea about photographing all the residents, making a proper record. She says it'll help with law enforcement. But between you and me, I think she's trying to document who actually belongs here before Stroud brings in more hired guns. Clever woman. May O'Rourke didn't get to be the first female sheriff in the territory by being stupid, though plenty of folks think she got it by being widow to the last sheriff. Dinah's tone suggested what she thought of those folks. You'll find her at the jail most mornings. After Dinah left, Joe worked alongside Tommy to arrange the shop. The boy proved quick and eager to learn, absorbing her explanations about chemical preparations with the focused intensity of the naturally curious. They were discussing the properties of silver nitrate when boot steps on the porch announced another visitor. Archer Hale filled the doorway, hat in hand, in daylight, without the drama of yesterday's confrontation. Joe could see him more clearly. The scars on his hands were old but numerous, and there was a watchfulness in his eyes that spoke of hard-earned caution. Miss Keats, Tommy. He nodded to each of them. Settling in. Making progress. Joe wiped her hands on her apron. What can I do for you, Mr. Hale? He reached into his jacket and withdrew a cloth-wrapped package. Thought you might need these special plates from Denver. They handle the desert light better than standard glass. Joe unwrapped one carefully, holding it up to examine. The quality was exceptional. The coating even, and professional. These are expensive. Consider it an investment in documentation. We need someone recording what's happening here, and I'd rather it be someone who knows which end of the camera to point. Yesterday you warned me about taking dangerous pictures. I did. He settled against the doorframe, making no move to enter uninvited. But I also watched you hold steady during a situation that would have sent most folks running. Figure if you're determined to stay, might as well have the right tools. Tommy looked between them with bright interest. Mr. Hale knows about photographs? Some? Archer's expression grew distant. Knew a photographer during the war. Matthew Brady's crew. Man taught me a few things about capturing truth versus capturing what people want to see. You were in the war, Tommy breathed. Everybody was in the war, son. One way or another. He straightened, placing his hat back on his head. Miss Keats, the co-op's having a meeting Thursday night. Might be you'd want to attend, being a business owner and all. I'm not a member of your water cooperative. Not yet, but Dust Haven's small enough that what affects one affects all. Your shop needs water for chemical processes, same as the laundry or the livery. Might be good to understand how we manage things. After he left, Tommy couldn't contain his excitement. He talked to you like a regular person, Mr. Hale don't usually talk much to nobody, especially not lady folks. No. Ma says he's nursing a broken heart from the war. Lost someone special, she figures. That's why he never goes to dances or nothing. Joe filed that information away while showing Tommy how to mix developer solution. The afternoon passed quickly, and by evening they'd made significant progress. The shop was taking shape, with a designated area for portraits and a curtained section for the darkroom. As Tommy prepared to leave, Sheriff May O'Rourke arrived. She was a compact woman in her 40s. Steel gray hair pulled back severely, wearing a split riding skirt and a star pinned to her vest. "Miss Keats, heard you been busy." Her handshake was firm as any man's. "Also heard you documented yesterday's incident at the well." "I did." "Good. We need evidence if this ever comes to legal proceedings." May's sharp eyes surveyed the shop. "I've got a proposition for you. Town needs official photographs of all residents for identification purposes. I can pay $2 per dozen images, plus materials." "That's generous." "It's necessary. Stroud's been bringing in strangers, claiming they're longtime residents with water rights. Hard to dispute without proof." May paused. "Fair warning, though. Take this job, and you're choosing a side. Stroud won't like his new residents being documented." "Sheriff, I chose a side the moment I aimed my camera at that well. Might as well make it official." May's stern face cracked into a smile. "I like you. Keats, think you'll do just fine here. Start with the established families, the Chens, the Morettis, the Johnsons. They'll be glad to have their place here documented." That evening, as Jo developed the plate from yesterday's confrontation, she thought about the threads she was already weaving into Dusthaven's fabric. Tommy, eager to learn. Dinah, offering friendship and warnings in equal measure. May, trying to hold the law together with photographs and determination. And Archer Hale, bringing expensive gifts and cryptic invitations. The image materialized in the chemical bath Archer by the stopped fountain, the crowd's anxious faces, Jake's fury, and Caleb Stroud's men poised for violence. It was a good photograph, technically and compositionally. But more than that, it was evidence of a moment when one man's understanding of power, real power, the control of necessity, had trumped guns and threats. Jo hung the plate to dry and began preparing for tomorrow's portrait sessions. She'd need to project respectability while maintaining her independence, a balance as delicate as any chemical mixture. The women of the town would be watching, judging, deciding whether to accept her or shun her. Well, she'd navigated worse. At least here, the battles were open and honest, water against silver, community against greed. Not like St. Louis, where the weapons were whispers and social cuts, and where a woman who chose profession over propriety might as well have been invisible. Here in Dusthaven, she was decidedly visible, for better or worse. The rain came without warning, as violent weather often did in the high desert. One moment the sky was clear, the next, black clouds rolled over the Mule Mountains like smoke from a prairie fire. The first drops hit the dust with audible pops, each one raising a small crater that immediately filled with muddy water. Jo stood in her shop doorway, watching the transformation. After weeks of bone-dry heat, the rain should have been welcome, but something in the air, a metallic taste. A pressure behind her eyes made her uneasy. "Storm's wrong," Little Wolf said from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach, but then she never did. The young Cheyenne man moved like his namesake, all quiet grace and watchful eyes. "Smells like poison." Poison. Jo turned to study him. He'd come to her shop the previous week for a portrait, paying with a beautifully beaded medicine bag that now hung in her window. "What do you mean?" "Water speaks truth. This water speaks of sickness." He pointed toward the mountains where Stroud's mine carved into the earth. "When men tear at the earth's bones, sometimes the earth bleeds strange blood." Before the Jo could respond, a cry went up from the street. "The creek's rising! Flash flood!" The next moments blurred together in a chaos of motion and sound. The usually dry creek bed that ran along the town's eastern edge had transformed into a churning monster of brown water, carrying debris, uprooted cacti, and Jo's heart clenched what looked like mining equipment. "The warehouse!" someone shouted. "There's kids playing in there!" Jo grabbed her medical supplies habits from covering battlefield aftermath, died hard, and ran toward the commotion. The old storage warehouse sat partially collapsed near the creek bank, water already lapping at its foundations. Through a broken window, she could see small faces pressed against the glass, too high to reach. Archer Hale was already there, rope in hand, with Little Wolf beside him. Without discussion. They moved in practice synchronization, Archer securing the rope to a sturdy post, while Little Wolf waded into the rising water. "I'm lighter," Jo said, dropping her supplies. "I can get through that window easier than either of you." Archer looked at her, rain streaming down his face, then nodded once. "Can you swim?" "Well enough." He wrapped the rope around her waist with quick, efficient knots. His hands were steady, but she felt them tremble once as they brushed her ribs. "Current's strong. Don't fight it, use it. Get to the window, boost the kids out, and we'll pull you back." The water hit like a cold fist, brutal and shocking. Jo let it carry her toward the warehouse, using the rope as a guide. The window was higher than it looked, and she had to brace against the wall to reach it. Inside, 3 children huddled on top of stacked crates. Tommy Pike and 2 Mexican children she recognized from the laundry. "Come on," she called, holding out her arms. "One at a time." Tommy, brave boy that he was, boosted the younger children up first. Jo caught them, passing them to Little Wolf, who had positioned himself midway between her and shore. The water was rising faster now, swirling with strange orange-brown foam that stung where it touched skin. As she lifted the last child, Tommy, of course, insisting on going last, her camera instincts kicked in. Through the warehouse's broken roof, she could see upstream. There, caught against a pile of flood debris, were barrels marked with the Stroud mine stamp. One had split open, leaking viscous fluid that mixed with the flood water in oily rainbows. "Jo," Archer's voice cut through the storm. "Now." She pushed Tommy toward Little Wolf and let them haul her back through the current. They collapsed on higher ground just as the warehouse groaned and shifted, its remaining walls folding into the flood like a house of cards. "Everyone alive." May O'Rourke appeared, water streaming from her hat brim. "Good. Doc Morrison's set up in the church. Anybody touch that water needs checking." As they helped the children toward the church, Jo noticed her hands were already developing a rash where the water had touched bare skin. Tommy was limping, and one of the other children kept coughing, not from water in the lungs, but from the fumes. The church had transformed into a makeshift hospital. Doc Morrison, a thin man who looked like he'd been subsisting on coffee and determination for decades, moved between patients with grim efficiency. "Chemical burns," he diagnosed, examining Jo's hands. "Consistent with mining runoff, sulfuric compounds, probably, maybe worse." "I saw barrels from the mine," Jo said. "They'd broken open upstream." The doctor's expression darkened. "Then we're lucky more people weren't in that water. Sheriff, this needs documenting." "Already on it." May had her notebook out. "Miss Keats, soon as you're able. I need those photographs. Evidence of what came downstream." Jo thought of her camera, safe in the shop but useless without her hands to operate it. Then she noticed Tommy watching, his own burned hands wrapped in bandages. "Tommy," she called, "remember what I taught you about coating plates?" His eyes widened. "You mean you want me to do it?" "We'll do it together. Your hands are smaller, might hurt less. And this is important. Tommy, people need to see what happened here." Over the next hours, as the storm passed and the flood receded, Jo directed Tommy through the process of preparing plates and capturing images. Each photograph was agony, her burned hands screaming as she adjusted focus and composed shots. But Tommy proved an able assistant. They documented everything: the debris field showing mine equipment and chemical barrels, the watermarks on buildings showing the orange-brown residue, the dead fish already floating in contaminated pools. Most damning of all, they photographed a partially submerged wooden sign that had washed down from the mountain: Stroud Mining Company, Leach Pond 3. "He's been using cyanide leaching," Archer said quietly. Studying the sign, he'd changed into dry clothes but hadn't left Jo's side since the rescue. New process for extracting silver from low-grade ore. supposed to keep it contained in lined ponds. But heavy rain could overflow those ponds. Joe finished. Wash everything downstream. Or he never lined them proper in the first place. Little Wolf crouched beside a dead rabbit, its fur sloughed off where the water had touched it. Earth-bleeding poison, like I said. That evening, as Joe developed the plates with Tommy's help, his smaller fingers could manage the delicate work better than her bandaged hands. Archer finally voiced what she'd seen in his eyes all day. This is my fault, he said quietly. I knew Stroud was cutting corners. Should have pushed harder, done something sooner. You saved those children today. After putting them in danger by not stopping Stroud months ago. He stood by the window, silhouette rigid against the dying light. You asked once why I look at water the way I do. During the war, I was part of a unit sent to protect supply lines. Confederate raiders poisoned wells along our route with dead animals, sometimes worse. Watched men die of thirst rather than risk bad water, or die of fever when they drank anyway. Joe set down the developing tray and moved to stand beside him. That wasn't your fault either. No, I was the one who found clean water eventually. Diverted a creek to bypass the poisoned wells. Saved my unit but flooded a Confederate field hospital downstream. Never knew how many died until after the war. His laugh was bitter. They court-martialed me for it. Charges dropped eventually, fog of war and all that, but the knowing doesn't leave you. Is that why you came west? Came west to forget, stayed because water here is life itself, not a weapon, or it was, until men like Stroud brought their poisons with them. He turned to face her. You should leave. Joe, take your photographs to the territorial capital. Show them to people who can actually do something. Don't stay and watch this town die slowly. Is that what you're going to do, leave? His smile was sad. I'm bound here by more than conscience now, but you... I'm bound here too. She held up her bandaged hands. By these children who need teaching, by May who needs evidence, by people like Dinah who deserve better than to watch their home get poisoned for profit. She paused. By men who give expensive photography plates to strangers because they believe in documenting truth. Something shifted in his expression then, a softening of the harsh lines grief had carved. Stubborn woman. Pot, meet kettle. From the front room, Tommy called out, Miss Joe, the plates are ready. They moved to examine the developed images. Even in the chemical-scented dimness of the makeshift darkroom, the photographs told a damning story. The contaminated flood, the mine equipment, the chemical barrels all captured with Tommy's growing skill under Joe's direction. These are evidence of criminal negligence at best, murder at worst, May said, having arrived to check on the documentation. Question is, will anyone with power care? They'll care, Archer said grimly. Make copies. Joe, send sets to the territorial governor, the mining commission, every newspaper that'll print them. Stroud's been playing local politics, but this, he gestured at the images. This is bigger than he can buy his way out of. Little Wolf, who'd been silently studying the photographs, spoke up. The earth remembers. Your pictures make others remember too. This is good medicine, even if it brings hard times first. As they prepared packages of photographs for mailing, Joe noticed her hands had stopped shaking. The burns would heal, leaving scars probably. But she'd been marked by her work before. What mattered was that the truth had been captured, preserved, shared. Outside, the sun set over a town forever changed. The flood had receded, but its poison remained in the soil, in the water table, in the growing anger of people who'd nearly lost their children to one man's greed. There'll be a reckoning, May said quietly. Stroud won't take this lying down when those photographs start circulating? Let him come, Archer interrupted. Some fights you can't walk away from, not anymore. Joe thought of the children they'd pulled from the flood, of Tommy's fierce concentration as he'd helped capture the evidence, of Archer's hands steady on the rope despite his own demons. She thought of Little Wolf's words about medicine and memory. No, she agreed. Not anymore. The first stars appeared in the desert sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled wild and free and utterly unmoved by the human drama playing out below. The earth would remember, as Little Wolf said, and thanks to courage, quick thinking, and the alchemy of silver nitrate on glass, so would everyone else. The church hall glowed with lantern light, fiddle music spilling into the cool October evening. Jo stood at the entrance, smoothing her dress, a deep blue wool she'd sewn herself. Proper enough for a church function, but practical enough for dancing. Her hands had healed from the chemical burns, leaving only faint scars that caught the light when she moved. "You clean up nice," Dinah said, appearing at her elbow. "Though you might want to smile. You look like you're heading to a funeral, not a social—" "I'm not much for dancing." "That's not what I heard. Tommy's been telling everyone how you taught him the Virginia reel while developing plates last week." Jo smiled despite herself. The boy had been struggling with the tedium of timing chemical baths, so she'd taught him to count steps instead of seconds. That was different. Uh-huh. Dinah's knowing look suggested she wasn't fooled. "Nothing to do with who might ask you to dance tonight." Inside, the hall buzzed with conversation. The recent flood had united the town in unexpected ways, shared danger, creating bonds that crossed the usual social divides. Even the Mexican families from the south side were present, their children playing with the Anglo youngsters near the refreshment table. Jo spotted Archer near the musicians, deep in conversation with Judge Morrison. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt and string tie, though he still wore his everyday boots. When he laughed at something the judge said, years seemed to fall from his face. "Miss Keats." Young Reverend Elias Ward approached, his earnest face bright with welcome. "I'm so glad you came. I've been hoping to thank you properly for documenting the flood damage. Those photographs have been instrumental in our petition to the territorial government." "I'm glad they've helped." "More than helped. We've received word that an inspector is coming from Phoenix to investigate." He lowered his voice. "Though I worry what Mr. Stroud might do when he learns of it." As if summoned by his name, Caleb Stroud entered the hall with an entourage, where other men had dressed up for the occasion. Stroud had dressed rich silk vest, gold watch chain, boots that had never seen honest dirt. Behind him walked his lawyer, Augustus Lang, a thin man with the predatory patience of a buzzard. The music faltered for a moment before resuming. Conversations quieted, then started again with forced cheer. Stroud made his way through the crowd like a shark through minnows, pausing here and there to glad-hand the business owners who still owed him money. "Don't look now," May O'Rourke murmured, joining their small group. "But trouble's heading this way." Stroud stopped before Jo, his smile as cold as his eyes were calculating. "Miss Keats, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. Caleb Stroud." He didn't offer his hand a calculated insult. "I've heard so much about you and your work." "All accurate, I hope." "Oh, quite accurate. In fact, that's what concerns me." His smile widened. "A widow. I understand tragic. Losing a husband so young. Must be difficult. Making your way alone in the world. Dangerous, even." Jo felt Dinah stiffen beside her. Saw May's hand drift toward where her gun would normally rest. But before anyone could respond, Archer materialized at Jo's side. "Miss Keats promised me the first dance," he said smoothly. "If you'll excuse us, Stroud." He offered his arm, and Jo took it, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor just as the fiddler struck up a waltz. Other couples joined them, creating a buffer between them and Stroud's glowering presence. "I don't recall promising you anything," Jo said as Archer's hand found her waist. "No must have been wishful thinking." He guided her into the first turn with surprising grace. "Seemed like you needed rescuing." "I've been handling men like Stroud since before I could walk." "I don't doubt it. But sometimes it's nice not to handle things alone." The warmth in his voice made her miss a step. He steadied her easily, and for a moment they simply moved together, finding their rhythm. He danced like he did everything else with quiet competence and careful attention. "You've been avoiding me," she said finally. 3 weeks since the flood, and you've found reasons not to come by the shop. Been busy? The contamination spread further than we thought. Half the wells in the valley are showing signs of poison. That's not why, he sighed, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. No, that's not why. Then, because every time I see you, I want things I have no right to want. Because you're brave and stubborn, and you see truth through that camera lens of yours. And he stopped himself. I bring disaster to people I care about. That's nonsense. Is it ask the men who died because I diverted that creek? Ask the folks downstream from Stroud's mine who are drinking poison because I didn't stop him sooner. Joe pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You're not God. Archer Hale, you don't control the rain or men's greed or the consequences of every decision. You do what you can with what you know at the time. That's all anyone can do. Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. Before he could respond, commotion erupted near the entrance. Lang, the lawyer, was addressing the crowd, papers in hand. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, Mr. Stroud has graciously prepared documents that will ensure the water rights of this community are properly protected. Protected from what? Someone called out. From outside interference, of course. The railroad companies, the federal government, they're all eyeing our resources. This agreement simply ensures that water rights remain with local ownership. May pushed through the crowd. Local ownership meaning Stroud Mining Company. Mr. Stroud is local, is he not? Lang's smile was serpentine. He employs half this town, brings prosperity. He brings poison. Tommy Pike's young voice rang out clear and angry. My friends nearly died in that flood. An unfortunate accident, Lang said smoothly. Which is why Mr. Stroud is generously offering to manage the water resources to prevent such tragedies in the future. Joe felt Archer tense beside her. She squeezed his arm in warning, then stepped forward herself. Mr. Lang, would you care to explain the clause on page 3, the one that grants exclusive drainage rights to the mining company? Lang's eyes narrowed. I wasn't aware you'd seen the documents. Miss Keats. I haven't, but I've seen enough contracts to recognize legal language designed to hide intent. She smiled sweetly. Perhaps you could read that clause aloud. Let everyone understand what they're being asked to sign. This is hardly the venue for legal discourse. On the contrary, Reverend Ward interjected. My church is exactly the place for truth and transparency. Please, Mr. Lang, read the clause. Trapped. Lang cleared his throat and read in a monotone. The party of the first part grants to the party of the second part exclusive and perpetual rights to all drainage, runoff, and subsidiary water sources originating from or passing through properties as designated in Appendix A. In plain English. Joe translated. Stroud gets control of every drop of water that flows through this valley. Forever. The crowd erupted. Angry voices rose. Accusations flew. Stroud's hired men moved closer to their boss, hands hovering near concealed weapons. The tension ratcheted toward violence. Then Little Wolf stepped into the center of the room. He said nothing, simply stood there, but his presence created a pocket of calm. Into that silence, he spoke. In my people's way, water belongs to none and to all. Like air, like sunlight, a man who claims to own the water claims to own life itself. He looked directly at Stroud. This is not wisdom. This is sickness. Savage opinions aren't wanted here. Stroud snarled. Then perhaps mine are... Judge Morrison shouldered through the crowd, his usual joviality replaced by judicial sternness. As the legal authority in this district, I'm impounding these documents pending review. Any attempt to enforce them before proper examination will be considered fraud. Stroud's face darkened to the color of thunderclouds. You've overstepped, Morrison. I own the mortgage on your house. Or did you forget? I haven't forgotten anything, Caleb, including the fact that a judge's oath supersedes personal interest. Morrison collected the papers from Lang. Court will convene Monday morning. Any resident who feels they've been coerced into signing anything should come see me. This isn't over, Stroud said, his voice deadly quiet. He pointed at Joe. And you spreading your lies with those photographs, turning people against progress, you'll answer for that. Widows have accidents in frontier towns. Shame if history repeated itself. The threat hung in the air like smoke, before anyone could react. Stroud turned on his heel and stalked out, his entourage trailing behind. The music had long since stopped. In the silence, Joe heard her own heartbeat loud as thunder. Then Dinah's voice, deliberately bright. Well, that was more excitement than a church social usually provides. Musicians? How about something cheerful? This is supposed to be a dance. Slowly, normalcy reasserted itself. The fiddle started up again. Couples returned to dancing, though the earlier ease was gone. Archer hadn't left Joe's side. Pack your things tonight, he said quietly. I've got that line cabin out by the water station. It's rough, but it's defensible. And... No. Joe, you heard him. I heard a bully making threats because he's losing control. She turned to face him fully. I won't run. Not from him. Not from this. Stubborn woman, he said, but there was admiration mixed with the frustration. We've established that. She hesitated, then made her own choice. But I wouldn't object to company walking me home tonight, if you're offering. Relief flickered across his features. I'm offering. They said their goodbyes. May promised to post extra patrols. Dinah threatened to shoot anyone who came near Joe's shop uninvited, and Tommy hugged Joe fiercely before his mother dragged him home. Outside, the desert night was crisp and clear. Stars wheeled overhead in patterns older than any human conflict. They walked in comfortable silence until they reached Joe's shop. Thank you, she said, for the dance, for the escort, for not being fool enough to let you face Stroud alone. You're welcome. He paused. That line cabin offer stands, not because I think you're weak, but because even the strongest person shouldn't have to stand watch alone. Joe considered this. Ask me again after the court hearing Monday, when we see which way the wind blows. Fair enough. He touched his hat brim. Lock your doors, Joe, and keep that derringer handy. As he walked away, Joe noticed he didn't go toward his own lodgings. Instead, he faded into the shadows across from her shop, taking up a watch position. She smiled despite the circumstances. Stubborn man. Inside, she checked her cameras, her plates, her evidence files, all secure. Tomorrow she'd make more copies of the flood photographs, send them to every newspaper in the territory. Monday would bring the legal battle. But tonight, she allowed herself one moment of pure memory, Archer's hand warm on her waist, his voice rough with unwanted emotion, the solid safety of his presence as they danced. Whatever came next, she'd had that. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called to its pack, and in a shop that smelled of chemicals and ambition, a woman who'd already lost one life to violence cleaned her guns and prepared to fight for her new one. The wind howled through the gaps in the line cabin's walls like a living thing, rattling the tin roof and sending dust devils dancing across the floor. Joe shivered despite the thick blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her body still fighting the fever that had taken hold after the courthouse confrontation that morning. You should have gone to Doc Morrison, Archer said, adding another piece of mesquite to the small iron stove. The wood caught with a shower of sparks, casting dancing shadows on the rough walls. For what so Stroud's men could find me there. Joe pulled the blanket tighter. Besides, it's just exhaustion. The trial, the threats, everything catching up. The day had been a disaster. Judge Morrison had barely gavelled the hearing to order when Stroud's lawyers produced territorial documents that predated the town charter, claiming prior rights to all water sources. The courtroom had erupted in chaos, and in the melee, someone Joe suspected one of Stroud's men had shoved her hard into a wall. She'd hit her head, seen stars, and by the time May restored order, Stroud was already gloating about his victory. "Drink this." Archer pressed a tin cup into her hands. The coffee was bitter and strong, cut with something medicinal that burned going down. "Little Wolf's recipe. Says it'll break the fever." Joe sipped carefully, studying him over the rim. In the flickering light, she could see new lines of tension around his eyes, the way his hand never strayed far from his gun. "You're worried. Stroud's men were asking about you in town, where you went, who you were with." He settled on a crate across from her, the small space suddenly feeling smaller. "May's got her hands full keeping order. Half the town wants to storm the mine. The other half's ready to sell out and leave." "And you?" "I'm here." The simple statement carried more weight than any declaration. Joe set down the cup, her hands trembling slightly from fever or something else. She wasn't sure. "Why, Archer, why do you care what happens to me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "You know why. I need to hear it." He stood abruptly, pacing to the small window. Outside, another gust sent tumbleweeds racing past like fleeing spirits. "That first day, when you aimed your camera at me by the well, nobody's looked at me like that in years. Not like I was broken or dangerous or useful. Just like I was worth seeing." "You are worth seeing." He turned back to her, and the raw vulnerability in his expression took her breath away. "I've got blood on my hands. Joe, good intentions that led to bad ends. I'm no kind of man for a woman like you." "A woman like me." Joe stood, swaying slightly, the blanket falling from her shoulders. "You mean a widow used goods? A woman who chooses work over propriety? That's not—" "Then what?" She moved closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. "Tell me what kind of woman I am. Archer Hale, tell me who you think you see through your lens of guilt and self-punishment." His hands came up to steady her as she swayed again, and suddenly they were close. So close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I see someone brave," he said hoarsely. "Someone who stands for truth even when it costs her. Someone who teaches children and fights bullies and makes broken men believe they might be worth saving." The wind gusted again, hard enough to rattle the door in its frame. The lamp flickered, casting them in momentary darkness before flaring back to life. In that instant of shadow, something shifted between them, a barrier crumbling like walls in a flood. Joe reached up, her fingers tracing the scar that ran along his jaw. "I'm not looking to be saved, Archer, and I'm not looking to save anyone. I'm just looking for something real in all this dust and pretense." His hand covered hers, pressing it against his cheek. "This is real. God help me. This is the most real thing I've felt since—" She silenced him with a look. "No ghosts tonight, no past sins or future fears. Just us. Just now." He studied her face like he was memorizing it. Then, with infinite care, he lowered his head and kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost reverent, but when she responded, pressing closer, something ignited between them like flame to tinder. "Joe," he breathed against her lips, a question and a prayer. She answered by pulling him down for another kiss, deeper this time, her hands tangling in his hair. The fever made everything feel heightened, dreamlike the scratch of his stubble, the solid warmth of his chest, the way he held her like she was both precious and unbreakable. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Joe felt reckless with want and clarity. The social rules that had governed her life in St. Louis seemed as distant as stars. Here, in this rough cabin with the wind trying to tear it apart, only truth mattered. "Rip my skirt off," she ordered. her voice steady despite the flush in her cheeks. Archer went absolutely still. "Joe!" "I mean it." She held his gaze, unflinching. "I'm tired of being wrapped in expectations like armor, tired of being the proper widow, the respectable photographer, the woman who follows rules made by people who've never faced a dust storm or a flash flood or a man who thinks he owns the water and the sky." His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing her cheekbones with aching tenderness. "You're sure because once this line is crossed, then we cross it together." She covered his hands with hers. "Unless you don't want." He silenced her doubt with another kiss, fierce and claiming. Then, with shaking hands, he reached for the buttons of her skirt, but instead of tearing, he worked each one free with careful deliberation, his eyes never leaving hers. "If we do this," he said softly, "we do it right. No violence, no rush, just choice." The skirt pulled at her feet, and Joe kicked it away, standing before him in her chemise and petticoats. The wind howled louder, but the cabin felt warm, safe, a world unto itself. "I choose you," she said simply, scars and guilt and stubborn nobility and all. He pulled her against him then, holding her tight enough to feel his heart racing. "I'll obey until my last breath," he whispered against her hair, echoing her earlier command but transforming it into a vow. "Whatever you need, whatever you want, I'm yours. Joe." They moved together toward the narrow cot in the corner, shedding layers both cloth and emotional with each step. The lamplight painted their skin gold and shadow, highlighting scars and strengths alike. When they came together, it was with a desperate tenderness, a recognition of kindred spirits who'd found each other in an unlikely place. Later, as they lay entwined with the storm finally dying outside, Joe traced patterns on Archer's chest, feeling more at peace than she had since James died. No, that wasn't right. This was different, deeper, with James. She'd been a girl playing at marriage. Now she was a woman who'd chosen her path with eyes wide open. "What happens tomorrow?" Archer asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We fight. We stand with the town against Stroud. We protect the water and the people who depend on it." She propped herself up on an elbow to look at him. "But we do it together. No more standing guard from the shadows. No more protective distance. Partners." Partners." He smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Though you know this makes everything more dangerous. Stroud will use any leverage." "Let him try." Joe's voice held steel beneath the softness. "I've got photographs proving his crimes. You've got the respect of the town. Together, we've got truth on our side." "Truth doesn't stop bullets." "No, but it makes them worth risking." He pulled her back down, holding her close. "Stubborn, brave, impossible woman." "Guilty as charged." She yawned, the fever finally breaking, leaving her exhausted but clear-headed, though I prefer determined. As sleep claimed her, Joe thought about the morning, about the battles yet to come. Stroud wouldn't give up easily. The legal fight was just beginning. But for now, in this stolen moment of peace, she'd found something worth fighting for, not just the town or justice or water rights, but this connection, this choice to love despite the odds. The wind died to a whisper, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote sang to the stars. In the line cabin, two people who'd thought themselves too damaged for love discovered that sometimes the broken pieces of two lives could fit together to make something stronger than either alone. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, but tonight they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. The makeshift courtroom in the church was packed to the rafters, townspeople standing shoulder to shoulder in the aisles. Joe had arrived early to set up her photographs along the walls, a gallery of evidence showing poisoned water, dead livestock, and the faces of children who'd nearly drowned in contaminated floods. Sheriff May O'Rourke stood at the front, her badge polished but her face grim. "This is a public hearing, not a trial." she announced. But given the stakes, Judge Morrison has agreed to hear testimony from all parties regarding the water rights dispute. Caleb Stroud sat at a table with his lawyer, Lang, looking supremely confident in his expensive suit. He'd brought his own supporters hired guns trying to look like ranchers, their new clothes still bearing shop creases. "Your Honor," Lang began, standing with theatrical flair, "we've already presented documents showing Mr. Stroud's prior claim to all water sources in this valley. This hearing is merely the town's right to present counter-evidence," Judge Morrison interrupted. "Proceed, Sheriff." May nodded to Joe, who stood and approached the judge's makeshift bench. "Your Honor, I'd like to present photographic evidence of systematic poisoning of our water supply by Stroud Mining Company." "Objection," Lang shot up. "Photographs can be manipulated, staged." "Then let's hear from witnesses who were there." Joe gestured to the crowd. "Tommy Pike, would you come forward?" The boy made his way to the front, hat clutched in his hands. At Joe's encouraging nod, he spoke clearly. "I was in that warehouse when the flood hit. Water was orange-brown, burned our skin. I helped Miss Joe take pictures after seeing them chemical barrels myself, floating down from the mine." One by one, witnesses came forward. Elias Ward testified about finding dead fish weeks before the flood. Little Wolf presented water samples he'd collected, showing contamination levels. Doc Morrison detailed the injuries he'd treated: chemical burns, respiratory problems, symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. Through it all, Stroud's expression grew darker. When Archer took the stand, tension crackled through the room like lightning before a strike. "State your name and occupation," May instructed. "Archer Hale. I manage the water cooperative for the local ranchers and farmers." "And what can you tell us about Stroud Mining's water usage?" Archer's testimony was damning: dates, amounts, illegal diversions, intimidation tactics. But it was when he produced a map that the room erupted. "This shows the original Spanish land grant for this valley," he explained. "Notice the water rights clause, agua para todos, water for all. Any claim predating the town would still be subject to this communal usage requirement." Lang objected furiously, but Judge Morrison allowed the evidence. The tide was turning, and everyone could feel it. That's when Stroud played his final card. "Your Honor," he said, standing with calculated calm, "I'd like to call one witness, Joanna Keats." Joe felt the blood drain from her face as she approached the witness chair. She'd expected attacks on her evidence, not on her personally. "Mrs. Keats, or is it Miss T—" Stroud's smile was predatory. "You seem confused about your own status." "I'm a widow." "Really, because I've had investigators looking into your background." He produced a telegram with flourish. "No record of a James Keats dying in St. Louis in the past 5 years. No record of a marriage either." The crowd murmured. Joe's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept her voice steady. "My husband died in Kansas, not St. Louis. We were married there, too." "Convenient. Records lost." "No doubt." Stroud circled her chair like a vulture. "Just like it's convenient you showed up here right when the water disputes began. Almost like someone sent you to stir up trouble." "That's ridiculous." "Is it a woman traveling alone, taking inflammatory pictures, turning the town against its biggest employer?" He leaned closer. "Tell me, Miss Keats, who's paying you? The railroad companies, Eastern newspapers looking for scandal?" "No one's paying me except the people who hire me for portraits." "So you claim, just like you claim to be a widow, claim to be a simple photographer, claim those pictures weren't staged?" "Enough." Archer was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is harassment, not testimony." But Stroud wasn't finished. "Interesting how quick Mr. Hale is to defend her. Tell me, Hale, when did you start keeping company with this woman, before or after she began her campaign against me?" The implication hung in the air like poison. Joe saw the trap defend their relationship and seem guilty of conspiracy, or deny it and appear to be lying. Before anyone could respond, A commotion erupted at the door. A travel-stained man pushed through the crowd, accompanied by two territorial marshals. Judge Morrison, I'm Inspector Nathan Cross from the Territorial Mining Commission. He held up a leather portfolio. I've completed my investigation of Stroud Mining Company. Stroud went pale. What investigation? I wasn't informed. Federal investigation. Mr. Stroud. Initiated after we received extensive photographic evidence of water contamination. Cross nodded to Joe. Your documentation was thorough. Mrs. Keats, we've confirmed illegal chemical usage, improper waste disposal, and violation of water safety regulations. The inspector continued with devastating efficiency, listing violations, fines, and criminal charges. With each word, Stroud's empire crumbled. This is impossible, Stroud exploded. I own this town, I own the judges. The law... Federal law supersedes local corruption, Cross said calmly. Marshals, please take Mr. Stroud into custody. As the marshals moved forward, Stroud made a desperate grab for the gun of one of his hired men. The courtroom exploded into chaos, women screaming, men diving for cover, the crack of gunfire. Joe saw it happening in slow motion, Stroud swinging the gun toward Archer, his face twisted with rage. Without thinking, she grabbed the heavy camera plate from the evidence table and hurled it at Stroud. It struck his arm. Throwing off his aim, the shot went wild, shattering a window. Then May was there, her own gun drawn and steady. Drop it! Caleb, it's over! For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of explosion. Then Stroud's shoulders sagged, and the gun clattered to the floor. The marshals hauled him away, Lang scrambling after them, babbling about appeals. The crowd slowly settled, shock giving way to celebration as the implications sank in. Stroud was finished. The water would remain public. The town was saved. In the midst of the jubilation, Joe found herself face to face with Archer. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, heedless of the crowd. That was incredibly brave and incredibly stupid, he said against her hair. Pot, meet kettle, she replied, her voice shaky with delayed reaction. Judge Morrison gavelled for order one final time. In light of federal intervention, I'm ruling all of Stroud's claimed water rights null and void. The water cooperative will maintain management, with oversight from a town council to be elected next month. The crowd erupted in cheers. Tommy Pike threw his hat in the air. Dinah grabbed Joe in a fierce hug. Even Little Wolf smiled, a rare expression on his usually solemn face. As people streamed out to spread the news, Inspector Cross approached Joe. Mrs. Keats, the federal prosecutor will need your original photographs and testimony for the trial. Of course. He studied her with shrewd eyes. Ever consider working for the government? We could use someone with your skills documenting mining violations throughout the territory. Before Joe could respond, Archer stepped forward. Mrs. Keats has a business here, a life here. I can speak for myself, Joe said, but she softened it with a smile. Thank you for the offer. Inspector, but Mr. Hale's right. I have roots here now. Cross nodded. If you change your mind, the offer stands. He tipped his hat. Good day, ma'am, Mr. Hale. As the church emptied, Joe began collecting her photographs. Archer helped, his fingers brushing hers as they handled the glass plates. He suspected us, she said quietly. Stroud, about our relationship. Let him suspect. Let the whole town know. Archer turned her to face him. I'm not hiding anymore. Joe, not my past, not my feelings, not us. The proper mourning period for a widow. You just threw a glass plate at an armed man to save my life. I think we're past propriety. His thumb traced her cheekbone. Marry me. The words hung between them like a held breath. Joe's heart raced, but her voice was steady. Ask me again when the dust settles. when we're not running on adrenaline and relief. I'll ask you tomorrow, and the day after, and every day until you say yes. Stubborn man, matched with a stubborn woman. He kissed her then, there in the empty church with dust motes dancing in the light from the broken window. We make a good team, Joanna Keats. Yes, she agreed, leaning into his solid warmth. We do. Outside, rain clouds gathered on the horizon, real rain this time, clean and promising. The water would flow clear again, the town would heal, and two damaged souls had found their way to each other across a landscape of dust and courage. The fight wasn't over. There would be a trial, appeals, probably attempts at revenge from Stroud's remaining supporters. But for now, justice had won a crucial battle, and that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. The morning after the trial dawned clear and bright, as if the earth itself was celebrating Stroud's downfall. Jo stood in her shop, developing the last photographs from yesterday's dramatic hearing, when Dinah burst through the door. Have you seen it? Dinah waved a telegram like a flag. Stroud's assets are frozen. The territorial governor ordered all his accounts sealed pending federal investigation. Jo carefully hung the wet plate to dry. That's good news for everyone he owes wages to. Better than good. It means the mine workers can file claims for back pay and damages. Dinah's expression sobered. Though it also means about 40 families lost their livelihood overnight. The mines shut down indefinitely. This was the hard truth Jo had been contemplating since dawn. Justice had consequences that fell on innocent shoulders too. What will they do? That's what we need to figure out. May O'Rourke entered, looking tired but satisfied. Morning. Ladies, Jo. That was fine work yesterday. Both the photographs and the plate throwing. I prefer the camera to projectiles, generally speaking. Well, both have their uses. May accepted the coffee Dinah offered. We're calling a town meeting for tonight. Need to sort out what happens next, water management, the mine workers, elections for the new council. And Lang Jo asked. Stroud's lawyer caught the first stage out of town this morning, along with half of Stroud's hired guns. Rats and sinking ships. May set down her cup. Which brings me to why I'm here. Jo, I need those photographs cataloged and secured. They're evidence now, and there might be attempts to destroy them before the federal trial. Jo nodded, already mentally organizing the task. After May left, she and Dinah worked in companionable silence, creating multiple copies of key images and preparing detailed documentation. You know, Dinah said eventually, folks are talking about you and Archer. I'm sure they are. Most of it's good, romantic, even the water manager and the photographer who saved the town together. Dinah grinned. Though Mrs. Hutchins thinks it's scandalous how fast you've thrown off widow's weeds. Mrs. Hutchins thinks divided skirts are scandalous. True. Dinah grew serious. You happy, honey, really happy? Jo considered the question, thinking of Archer's steady presence, his wounded honor slowly healing, the way he looked at her like she was both precious and powerful. Yes, happier than I thought I'd be again. Then that's all that matters. A knock interrupted them. Tommy Pike peered in, clutching a leather satchel. Miss Jo Mister, Hale sent me with something for you. Inside the satchel was a document the original Spanish land grant Archer had presented at the hearing, along with a note in his careful hand. This belongs in your archives. We're making history. Might as well document it properly. Aye. Tommy lingered, clearly wanting to say something. Jo waited patiently until he burst out. Miss Jo, what's going to happen to the school misses? Hutchins says with the mine closed, there's no money for a teacher. We'll figure something out. Tommy, learning doesn't stop just because one man's money does. After the boy left, Jo found herself staring at the land grant. Water for all. Such a simple concept. Yet men had died for it, killed for it, corrupted justice for it. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors, a delegation of former mine workers, led by a weathered man named Patrick O'Brien. Mrs. Keats, he began, hat in hand. We're hoping you might help us document something. What kind of documentation? Our injuries, ma'am, from working in Stroud's mine. O'Brien rolled up his sleeve, revealing chemical burns similar to what the flood had caused. Federal man said if we can prove the unsafe conditions, we might get compensation, but we need evidence. Joe spent the rest of the afternoon photographing scars, documenting testimonies, capturing the human cost of Stroud's greed. These men had known the dangers but worked anyway, desperate to feed their families. Now they were free but unemployed, safe but starving. As the sun began to set, people gathered in the town square for the meeting. Archer had set up a platform near the same well where their story had begun. He caught Joe's eye across the crowd and smiled. A private moment in the public gathering. Judge Morrison called for order. First matter, the water cooperative needs a formal charter and elected management. Archer Hale has been serving informally, but it's time to make things official. I nominate Archer Hale for water manager. Someone called out, and a chorus of agreement followed. The vote was unanimous. Next, we need to address the unemployment situation, Morrison continued. With the mine closed, I have a proposal. Little Wolf stepped forward, surprising everyone. He rarely spoke at public gatherings. The mining company owns much land around their claims. Good land. With water access now that Stroud cannot steal it, this land could be farmed, ranched. The assets are frozen. Someone objected. But not forever, May interjected. The federal receiver will need to sell them eventually. If the town pools resources, we could buy the land collectively, parcel it out to families who need it. The discussion that followed was heated but productive. By the end, they'd formed committees for land acquisition, established a fund for unemployed workers, and outlined plans for sustainable development that wouldn't repeat Stroud's mistakes. As the meeting concluded, Reverend Ward asked for one more moment. I'd like to recognize someone whose courage helped make this possible. Joanna Keats risked her safety to document the truth. Without her photographs, we might still be under Stroud's thumb. The applause was spontaneous and heartfelt. Joe felt her cheeks burn, unused to such public acknowledgement, but when she caught Archer's proud gaze, she stood a little straighter. Later, as the crowd dispersed, she found herself walking with Archer toward her shop. The evening air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Quite a day, she said. Quite a week. He took her hand, bold as brass in full view of anyone watching. Joe, there's something I need to tell you. Her heart stuttered. If this is about your past? No, not that. It's about the future. He stopped walking, turning to face her. The federal prosecutor spoke to me today. They want me to testify at Stroud's trial in Phoenix. It could take weeks, maybe months. Oh. Joe felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. When? 2 weeks. But Joe, I want you to come with me. She blinked. To Phoenix. As my wife. He squeezed her hands. I know I said I'd wait until the dust settled, but standing up there today, watching the town come together, seeing you get the recognition you deserve, I don't want to wait. Life's too short and too uncertain. Archer, marry me, Joanna, tomorrow, next week, whenever you say, but marry me before we leave for Phoenix. Let me face whatever comes knowing you're by my side, not just as a partner, but as my wife. Joe's mind raced. It was fast. Too fast by conventional standards. But when had she ever been conventional? She'd traveled alone to a frontier town, taken controversial photographs, thrown a glass plate at an armed man. Why should her courtship be any different? The town gossips will have a field day, she said. I let them gossip. I'm still technically in mourning. For a man who's been gone over 2 years. Joe, you've mourned enough. You've been alone enough. His voice dropped. I've been alone enough. She thought of the empty years after James died, the careful distance she'd maintained from everyone who might matter. Then she thought of these past months, the purpose she'd found, the community she'd joined, the man who'd seen her strength and matched it with his own. Yes, she said simply. Archer's face transformed with joy. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around right there in the street. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, ignoring the shocked gasps from Mrs. Hutchins' porch. When? He asked against her lips. Sunday, after church. Reverend Ward can perform the ceremony. She smiled. That gives me 5 days to make a wedding dress, and you 5 days to build us a proper house. I'll build you a palace. I'd rather have a dark room. Then you'll have the finest dark room in the territory. He kissed her again. With good water access. They parted at her shop door, Archer heading off to spread the news and no doubt endure considerable ribbing from the men at the cooperative. Jo went inside, lit her lamps, and looked around at the space that had become her sanctuary. In 5 days, she'd be Joanna Hale. The thought should have terrified her another name change, another identity shift. Instead, she felt settled, like a photograph finally coming into focus after being slightly blurred. She pulled out paper and began making lists. A wedding dress, something practical she could wear again. Photographs to finish before leaving, arrangements for the shop while she was gone, and a letter to send to St. Gadieu, Louis Noam, to friends who thought her lost to the wilderness. I am not lost, she wrote. I am found. I came to document life in a frontier town, and instead discovered my own life waiting to be lived. I'm marrying again a good man who sees me not as the widow Keats, but as myself, complete and complicated. The West has given me what the East never could, the freedom to be exactly who I am. Outside, someone started playing a fiddle, the music floating on the night air like a blessing. Jo smiled, sealed the letter, and began planning her new life. The town had won its water. She had won something even more precious, a second chance at love. Earned through courage, documented in silver and light, and flowing now as clear and vital as the water they'd fought to protect. A year had passed since the trial, and Dust Haven had transformed. The autumn drought was testing the new water management system, but the cooperative held strong. Jo stood in the doorway of their home, a sturdy adobe house Archer had built with his own hands, complete with the promised dark room, and watched the sunrise paint the mountains gold. Her hands rested on her swollen belly, feeling the flutter of movement within. Hope Keats Hale would arrive with the winter rains, Doc Morrison predicted, though Jo suspected their daughter had her own timeline in mind. You're up early. Archer's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. Everything all right? Just thinking. She leaned back into his warmth. A year ago, I was a widow with a camera and too much pride. Now look at us. Now you're a wife with a camera and just the right amount of pride, he teased, pressing a kiss to her temple, and about to make me a father, which still terrifies me more than any gunfight ever did. You'll be wonderful. Jo assured him. You've had practice with Tommy and the other children. The photography school had been an unexpected development. What started as teaching Tommy had grown into classes for 12 children and several adults. Even some former mine workers had joined, learning a trade that didn't poison their lungs or scar their hands. Speaking of Tommy, Archer said, he's waiting in the shop. Says he has something important to show you. Jo found her star pupil in the dark room, practically vibrating with excitement. At 14, he'd shot up like a weed, all knees and elbows, but his hands were steady with the camera. Miss Mrs. Hale, look. He held up a perfectly developed plate. I did the whole process myself. Coding, exposure, development. And see, I caught Mr. Chen right when he was laughing at something his grandson said. Jo examined the photograph with professional appreciation. The composition was excellent, the timing perfect. capturing a moment of pure joy between generations. "This is beautiful work, Tommy. You've got a real eye for human moments. Think I could maybe sell some Ma's still taking in washing, and every bit helps. I think Mrs. Chen would pay well for a portrait this lovely of her husband. And I know several families who've been asking about portraits." Joe smiled. "Consider yourself officially promoted from student to assistant. I'll need help when the baby comes." Tommy's whoop of joy could probably be heard in Phoenix, as he carefully stored the plate, chattering about all the photographs he planned to take. Joe felt a deep satisfaction. She'd planted seeds that were bearing fruit. The morning brought the usual stream of customers and students. Dinah stopped by with her daughter, now free to attend school since the new council had voted to fund public education. Little Wolf arrived with herbs for Joe's pregnancy discomforts, staying to discuss his latest project documenting traditional plant knowledge with photographs. It was nearly noon when the letter arrived that would complete their story. "Joe," Archer burst into the shop, envelope in hand. "It's from the federal prosecutor." She set down her camera, heart racing. They'd testified at Stroud's trial 6 months ago, but the appeals had dragged on. "What does it say?" "Guilty on all counts, sentenced to 20 years hard labor. His assets are officially released for sale." Archer's grin was fierce with satisfaction. "The town's bid for the land was accepted. We did it, Joe. We actually did it." The news spread like wildfire. By evening, the town square was full of celebration. The community land purchase meant 40 families would have farms come spring, the school would be fully funded, and the water rights would be protected in perpetuity. "Speech," someone called out as Archer and Joe arrived. "Let's hear from our water manager." Archer helped Joe onto the platform, no easy feat given her condition, before addressing the crowd. "A year ago, we stood for something simple. Water belongs to everyone. Tonight, we've proven that when a community stands together, not even the richest man can steal what's rightfully ours." "And let's hear from the woman who showed us the truth," May called out, gesturing to Joe. Joe felt the old flutter of nervousness at public speaking, but Archer's steady presence beside her gave her strength. "I came to Dust Haven as an outsider, looking to document the West as it really is. What I found was a community willing to fight for justice, to protect each other, to build something lasting. You welcomed me, taught me, and gave me a home. The real story of the West isn't about gunfights and gold strikes. It's about people like you, building lives and communities against all odds." The applause was warm and genuine. As Joe stepped down, helped by many hands, she noticed a familiar figure at the edge of the crowd, a young woman with a camera, travel-stained and uncertain, watching with the hungry eyes of someone looking for a new beginning. "I was you," Joe murmured to herself, remembering. Then louder, to Archer, "I'll be right back." She made her way to the stranger. "You're a photographer." "Yes, ma'am. Clara Jennings, from Chicago. I heard there was a woman here who—" She trailed off, suddenly shy. "Who proved a woman could make her way with a camera? That story's true. Are you looking for work?" "And a place to belong," Clara admitted. Joe smiled. "Then you've come to the right place. Come see me tomorrow at the shop on Main Street. Dust Haven can always use another person willing to see and share the truth." As the celebration continued around them, Joe found herself by the well where it all began. The windmill turned steadily in the evening breeze, drawing up clear water for all who needed it. She thought of the journey from that first photograph of Archer to this moment, heavy with their child, surrounded by the community they'd helped save. "No regrets?" Archer asked, joining her. "Not one." She took his hand, feeling the calluses from honest work, the strength that had pulled her from floodwaters and held her through storms. "Though I do have one request." "Anything?" "When Hope is old enough, we teach her to swim first thing. This is still a desert, and water will always be precious here." "Deal." He pulled her close, One hand splayed protectively over her belly. "What do you think? Will our daughter be a photographer like her mother or a water guardian like her father?" "Both," Joe said with certainty. "She'll be both, and more besides. That's what this place does. It lets you be everything you're capable of being." The first drops of rain began to fall. Gentle and sweet. Not a violent storm, but a blessing. The kind of rain that soaks deep into the earth and refills the aquifers. People laughed and danced. Faces turned up to the sky. Joe thought of the dress hanging in her wardrobe, the one with the carefully mended tear, washed clean and sewn with new thread. She'd kept it as a reminder that sometimes you had to tear away the old to make room for the new, that destruction could lead to creation, that the past didn't have to define the future. "Let's go home," she said, meaning not just the adobe house with its dark room and nursery and waiting, but the whole of it, the town, the people, the life they'd built from dust and determination. As they walked through the rain-softened streets, Joe's camera safe beneath Archer's coat, she knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be droughts and floods, new threats to their water and their peace, but there would also be new photographs to take, new truths to reveal, new lives to welcome. The letter from the Eastern newspaper was in her pocket, an offer to buy her story of Dusthaven's fight for water. Tomorrow she'd write back, accepting, but with conditions. This wasn't just her story to tell. It belonged to Tommy and Dinah, to May and Little Wolf, to every person who'd stood against injustice. She'd tell it true, with all its complexity and courage. But tonight, she was simply Joe Hale, walking through the rain with her husband, carrying their child, in a town that had become home. The water flowed clear and free. The community was strong, and love had found a way to bloom even in the desert. Sometimes the best stories weren't about endings at all, but about beginnings that looked like endings, about finding exactly where you belonged when you thought you were lost, about water and truth and the courage to demand both. The rain fell softly on Dusthaven, and all was well. Thank you for listening to this story of love and justice in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts about Joe and Archer's journey. If you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more authentic frontier stories. Give this video a like, and hit that hype button to help more people discover these chronicles of courage and romance in America's untamed territories.